This will continue with a further £12 million proposed in a second wave of programme funding.
Thank you, First Minister. I recently visited Cosheston VC School in my constituency, where I met with the head teacher and the chair of the governors. This is a happy school with pupils eager to learn from enthusiastic and able teachers. However, concerns were raised with me over the lack of space available, which has been worsened due to COVID restrictions. Staff spend non-teaching time working from their cars or in corridors, and pupils have just one toilet to share between a class of 30 in a temporary porta-cabin. Whilst pledges have been made to provide additional porta-cabins as a temporary solution, a permanent solution is available with ample classroom space found in the loft of the school building. Would you agree with me that a permanent solution is preferable to ensure that Cosheston School and its infrastructure is conducive to providing a suitable and enjoyable learning and working environment?
I thank the member for that supplementary question. And clearly he raises matters of importance to parents and students in Cosheston. The way in which the 21st Century Schools and Colleges programme works, however, is that it is for the local authority to prioritise their bids and then to submit them to the Welsh Government, which has the job of weighing them up across the whole of Wales and then allocating funding accordingly. As I said in my opening answer, Pembrokeshire has already had a significant programme of investment in the first phase of the 21st Century Schools programme, and in Band B, there's another £120 million going to be invested in the school and college estate in the Pembrokeshire County. And I'm sure that the governors and the head teacher of Cosheston School will be making their case alongside the member to the elected members of Pembrokeshire Council as they go about the difficult job of prioritisation.
Joyce Watson.
Diolch. I know Cosheston School well. I went there. But I do have a longer memory than the member for Carmarthen West and South Pembrokeshire. As a Pembrokeshire councillor from 1995, I saw the transformational impact of unprecedented investment in our schools by the successive UK governments. And today, despite more than a decade of Tory cuts to Welsh budget, I think I'm right in saying that the Welsh Government's fantastic 21st Century School programme has already funded 170 new schools and colleges in the first phase and another 43 projects underway in the second. So I'm assuming that all that is correct, First Minister, and I'm interested to know what your plans are for that programme going forward.
Well, I thank the member for that supplementary question. She is right to point to the transformational impact of the 21st Century Schools and Colleges programme, and nowhere is that more true than in Pembrokeshire. A new 10B Church in Wales primary school, Ysgol Hafan y Môr, a Welsh medium primary school, a new secondary school, Ysgol Harry Tudor, £6 million invested in Pembrokeshire College in Band A of the programme, and more to follow now in Band B. And I think Joyce Watson makes a very important point, Llywyd. This is not just quantity, that very large number of new schools and refurbished buildings that the programme has been able to provide. It's the quality of the environment that the programme focuses on. The fact that every building has a distinctive character of its own, that every one of them provides facilities fit for learning in the 21st century, and every one of them sends a powerful message to students who attend for their education of the investment that this nation wants to make in them and their futures. That's the significance of the programme, and Joyce Watson was quite right, Clywyd, to draw attention to it.
Question 2, Jack Sargent.
Yeah, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on the Welsh Government's target to fund additional police community support officers?
Llywydd, thank Jack Sargent for that. The programme for government commits to providing a further 100 police community support officers in Wales. I chaired a meeting of the Policing and Partnership Board for Wales on Thursday of last week, where this commitment was widely welcomed.
Oh, thank you, First Minister, for that answer. And I recently met with North Wales's newly elected Police and Crime Commissioner, Andy Dunbobin, and we both welcome the Welsh Government's additional PCSOs on top of those already funded by your government. But we were both extremely concerned about the UK government's failing to deliver the 62 police officers that the Prime Minister promised for Deeside. In fact, the Home Office just recently were only able to talk about recruitment rather than additional officers, and it was completely unclear whether this was to replace officers who have already left the force. First Minister, will you join calls from myself and Andy Dunbobin for the UK government to honour their promise, and will you also update the Chamber on how your government will work with North Wales Police to get additional community support officers on the street?
Well, I would thank Jack Sargent for that question and for his long-standing campaign to make sure that his constituency gets the level of policing that it needs. He will know that in 2018, the number of police officers across England and Wales was the lowest since 1981. And that is a direct result of that decade of austerity, when year after year after year, the Conservative Party inflicted cuts on police forces across England and Wales, and certainly here in Wales, where nearly 500 police officers were lost over that period. And despite the promises that have been made, I understand why the member goes on campaigning, because Alun and Deeside had fewer police officers in the year 2020 than it did in 2017, despite the promises that have been made. So I'm certainly happy to commit to work alongside him and the new Police and Crime Commissioner for North Wales to make sure that the promises that have been made by the UK government to undo some of the harm which they themselves had inflicted on the safety of communities, and to deliver on the promise they've made. Let me give the member one small spot of comfort, which is that we have received an assurance from the UK government, from the Home Office, that when they talk about additional police officers, they mean numbers over and above those needed to replace people who have retired or been promoted or for any other reason left the service. So we must hold them to account on that as well. In the meantime, Jack Sargent is obviously right, Llywydd, that our commitment, not simply to sustain the 500 police and community support officers that we've provided as a government almost throughout the period of austerity, but to add another 100 to that, was popular the length and breadth of Wales. We have an operational group set up to work on how that new 100 officers are going to be recruited, allocated and financed. The group met on the 15th of June, and when we get its advice, we will move forward, and I hope to see many of those new officers appointed and on the beat and in North Wales and in the member's constituency before the end of this financial year.
Mark Isherwood.
With community safety being a devolved matter, the Welsh Conservative Party manifesto in May stated we would increase funding for police community support officers each year, working alongside the UK Government to recruit an additional 20,000 officers in England and Wales by 2023. That's what's really happening. How do you therefore propose to ensure partnership working between the Welsh and UK Governments on this agenda, where the UK Government target to recruit 6,000 more police officers in England and Wales by March 2021 was dramatically exceeded, including 437 extra officers in Wales, 99 in North Wales, with further increases to follow in the next 2 years. Remember, it's a 3-year target, recognising that community safety in North Wales is entirely dependent upon North Wales Police's established integrated working with their adjacent partner police forces in North West England.
Well, I'm glad to hear the member's figures that show that his party is finally making good some of the damage that they inflicted on policing in Wales over a decade in which every time they cut the budget, he supported them in doing so. I agree with him, however, on the importance of working across boundaries to make sure that communities in Wales are kept as safe as possible. I said in my opening answer, Llywyd, that I chaired a meeting of the Policing and Partnership Board for Wales on Thursday of last week, and I was glad to welcome the Secretary of State for Wales to that meeting and to hear his contribution to it. Where the UK government is prepared to come to the table in that way, I welcome it. And it allows us to work together on areas where there are common concerns and clear interests of Welsh people in doing so.
Rhys Bowen.
Thank you very much, Llywydd. First Minister. CCSOs or PCSOs as they were then called for nearly a decade. I can reiterate that Welsh chief officers are happy with that. They're glad for the additional funding, and it's raised their capability and their visibility, which their English counterparts don't have. But as this is a reserve matter, policing is still a reserve matter, and the funding therefore is discretionary in nature, how secure is this funding for the future? Diolch.
Oh, well, the funding is entirely secure, shall we, for the rest of this Senedd term. My party's manifesto committed us to that, and it committed us to the extra 100 officers that will now be provided. Provision is already made in this year's budget to begin that process. And as I say, I look forward to seeing that upon process underway so that we can begin to spend the money that we've set aside and then to build that up so that we are funding the whole of the 600 officers to which we are committed as soon as that process is able to have them in place.
Cwestiynau gan arweinwyr y pleid.
Questions now from the party leaders. Leader of the Welsh Conservatives, Andrew Davies.
First Minister, 2 weeks ago, in response to my colleague Janet Finch-Saunders, you said the reason why low area status has moved up is because the importation of TB by farmers buying infected cattle and bringing them into this area. That caused a huge amount of distress and hurt in the agricultural industry. Do you accept that's a misleading statement, First Minister?
Sorry, I repeat for the record that assessment of disease report forms show that 8 in 10 confirmed breakdowns in low TB areas, and it was a low TB area that I was being asked about, are primarily attributable to cattle movements. So it's important to get that on the record as well. I'm grateful to the member for his question, though, because it allows me to say that, of course, farmers in Wales work very hard indeed through the biosecurity regimes that they put in place to try and protect their herds against TB. And they need to go on doing that, and they need to go on doing that alongside the Welsh Government and everything we put in place in order to go on bearing down on the scourge of TB in cattle, the harm it does to animals themselves, but also the very real impact which contracting TB in a cattle herd has on those who worked so hard very often to build up those herds and to look after them. None of that can take away from the known facts that in low incidence areas, it is cattle movement rather than, as I was being asked by Janet Finch-Saunders, rather than badger-driven spread of the disease that lies behind additional outbreaks.
First Minister, the distress of that statement is that you identified farmers as being part of the problem. You know and I know that the regulations that are in place from the Welsh Government require that all cattle that are moved prior to movement have to undergo a TB test, and that test is valid for 60 days. So the farmers themselves are doing all they can, along with the Welsh Government, in fairness, with the regulations that they've put in place. We will disagree about the overall campaign that the government are undertaking here in Wales, but that, I hope you will recognise, was a deeply distressing statement to make by yourself as First Minister, given that there is pre-movement testing of all bovine animals in Wales and animals that come into Wales from England. So will you apologise today for that distress that you have caused by that statement to the farming community, accepting that we do have policy differences about how TB should be tackled?
Let me put it like this. It was never my intention to cause distress to anybody in the statement that I made. What I was pointing to was that the question I was asked, which sought to place the blame for rises in TB in North Wales in low incidence areas, would best be dealt with by badger culling. And I make no apologies for repeating the fact that that is not the policy of the government, nor would it be the right response. Farmers themselves do have responsibilities. They have responsibilities for cattle movement, and they have responsibilities for discharging the testing regime. And I'm happy to repeat again that I know the enormous efforts that farmers make to keep their herds safe and to comply with those regimes. Where things break down, and we have undoubtedly seen rises in TB incidents in the Conway Valley, in Denbighshire and the Pennal areas, then it is right that the causes of that should be investigated, and investigated with an open mind. That involves all the players who have a part to play in keeping those herds safe and reducing TB in those areas.
Well, I regret the fact that you are unable to put an apology on the record, First Minister, but I'm grateful for your more detailed explanation around the sentiments of your comments some 2 weeks ago. If I could address in my third question to you the change of policy within 72 hours around the Llandeilo bypass, which I appreciate was a policy agreed with Plaid Cymru in a budget deal in 2017. I happen to believe that there does need to be a bypass for Llandeilo. I also believe there's other towns that require bypasses as well, such as Dinas Powys in my own electoral regions, which have been campaigning for some 50 years. But what I've struggled to find consistency is the remarks of the Minister on his feature in the Chamber that said, "I think it would be very odd if we'd left Llandeilo out of the whole of Wales review, and I would have certainly raised some questions." So why in 72 hours did the policy position change, or is this just pork barrel politics?
Well, Llywyd, the Minister set out subsequent to his statement on the floor of the Senedd the position of the Welsh Government. Let me be clear, when this government strikes an agreement with another party, it is our intention to honour that agreement. We had an agreement with Plaid Cymru in a previous budget round that involved a bypass at Llandeilo, and the roads review, which is a very important policy and will be carried out in accordance with the transport hierarchy that we set out at the end of the last Senedd term, but it will honour the agreement that we made.
Arweinydd.
Leader of Plaid Cymru, interim leader, Rhina Bjorwerth. Thank you very much, Llywydd. Now, the latest report of the Bovine Commission published today is sobering for anyone. I hope it'll awaken this government to see the impact of poverty on our communities, issues that have come to the fore during the pandemic. It shows clearly the inequality, the very deep inequality in our society. 1 in every 10 homes without certainty of the future of the roof above their heads. 80,000 have heard during the pandemic that they have to find new homes, and from tomorrow the no evictions policy will come to an end. Considering the findings of this report, will you reconsider that?
Well, Llywyd, of course I agree with what the member has said about the way in which the pandemic has exaggerated the inequalities that were already far too evident in our society. And this government continues to do everything we can to press against the rising tide of inequality here in Wales. But it is a tide that is rising because of the actions that are taken elsewhere. When I met the Chancellor of the Exchequer some weeks ago, I took the opportunity to press on him the need not to row back on the £20 a week that families in receipt of universal credit have in Wales as a response to the pandemic. Now, the Chancellor extended that in his March budget to the end of September, but those weeks are ticking away, and once again, those families face the none too distant prospect of losing £1,000 in a year, £1,000 that really makes an enormous difference every single week to the children who live in those families. And I pressed that point as powerfully as I could with the Chancellor. As far as evictions are concerned, let me just explain to the Chamber, and this will be set out in greater detail by my colleague Julie James. The regulations which have suspended evictions are coronavirus regulations. They have to be justified in law on the grounds of the pandemic. And as other parts of our society see greater normality restored, then greater normality has to be restored in other parts of Welsh life. Had we not done so, I think there is no doubt at all that the Welsh Government would have been challenged in the courts by landlords who have a legitimate interest in defending their own interests in the bargain between a landlord and a tenant. Now, we have done an enormous amount during the pandemic to strengthen the support that is available to tenants, extending notice periods, providing additional discretionary housing payments, funding the private rented sector debt helpline and the Citizens Advice Bureau, as well as the very significant millions and millions of pounds which we have spent through local authorities to go on dealing with problems of homelessness and stabilising people's housing situation. As the time comes when those regulations have to be lifted, the Minister will set out further assistance that we will provide to tenants in that position in order to minimise the risks that people run of becoming homeless and having to be rehoused in other ways by statutory authorities.
First Minister, one word struck me there, normal, normality, something we all are looking forward to in many ways in the context of this pandemic. But poverty has become far too normal. Child poverty has become far too normal from way beyond, way before days of pandemic. The Children's Commissioner yesterday said that children's poverty is the biggest challenge facing your government. It was true before this pandemic. As we've argued for many months, the Children's Commissioner is arguing that that free school meals should now be extended. You could speed up your review of that. You could just do what we've been calling for and extend free school meals to the children in every family in receipt of universal credit. Given the sobering message in that Bevin Foundation report today, why don't you just do that?
Well, so if only it were just that simple, that the Welsh Government could conjure out of the air the many, many millions of pounds that would be required to bring about such a policy, with all the other opportunities to do important things in the life of children in Wales and other Welsh citizens that would have to be foregone by doing so. I'm afraid being in government is a matter of choices, not of magic solutions, in which you simply say, why not find £100 million to do something, as though that had no cost to anything else that the Welsh Government could do. Nor is it possible, in the way that the member suggested, to accelerate the collection of data which we need to carry out the review. The PLASC data will become available. It will become available in the normal way. The Welsh Government doesn't have an ability simply to issue an instruction that would magic that data out of thin air either. In the meantime, Llywydd, it's important to put some facts on the record as well. In the month prior to the pandemic, so when things were, to use the member's word, normal, prior to the global pandemic, 66,000 children in Wales were in receipt of free school meals. Last month, the figure was 105,000. So that's nearly 40,000 extra children in receipt of free school meals in Wales in just over a year. Of course, this government wants to increase the number of children in Wales who are able to take up that offer. But we will have to do it in a way that is informed by the latest data and which is negotiated through the budget round, in which there will be many, many very important needs that his party and other members of the Senedd will advocate for, and which in the end we have to weigh up against one another and do the best we can from the inevitably limited resources that will be available to us.
That was a very long list of excuses why government hasn't taken the action in over 20 years that could at least show us that Wales is serious about tackling child poverty. But from child poverty to housing injustice that I was talking about, economic injustice to lower wages in Wales, universal credit then, has been a disaster to families in Wales. And devolution can and should be a line of defence between Westminster and Wales if used to its maximum potential. But given the catalogue of economic and social justices that I have just mentioned, there are many more. The results of Wales being tied to Westminster, compounded, yes, by inactions of successive Labour governments. Can you honestly stand by your comments back in April that the benefits system is part of the glue that holds the United Kingdom together? And in reality, can you genuinely say that there is no alternative to the continued entrenching of poverty that we're seeing for Wales as part of the UK?
Well, Llywydd, of course there are alternatives to the policies that entrench poverty. And my party consistently has advocated for those policies. And devolution is the line of defence against the worst impact of those policies. Our policies of supplementing the social wage of families here in Wales, all the things which we collectively provide, which otherwise people would have to find from their own pockets. Free prescriptions is just a single example of that. We've forgotten what it's like in Wales to have to weigh up which of 3 prescriptions you can afford to pay for, because you cannot afford to pay for them all, because families in Wales no longer face that dilemma. And families in Wales are up to £2,000 every year better off because of that string of decisions that successive governments have made here in Wales that leaves money in people's pockets. And that's a real defence. That's a real defence that every single day families in Wales feel, because they have money to do things that in other circumstances, were it not for the actions that the Senedd has taken, that money would not be there for them to make those decisions. So I don't think it helps anybody to act as though devolution would be no help to anybody, because it has been an enormous help, year in and year out, to families in every part of Wales. And so I do believe that properly run, the benefit system should be part of what binds the United Kingdom together. The fact that pensions are paid in Wales in the way they are does not depend for a moment on Wales alone. It depends upon that far bigger pool of risks that are placed into that pool and then rewards shared out between us. And that's just one example of the way in which a UK-wide benefit system continues to be to the advantage of Welsh people. It could be far more to our advantage, of course, if there was a government with a genuine commitment to redistribution, to using the engine of redistribution that the social security system should be. But the fact that a temporary occupation of government by a single party doesn't deliver that should not be mistaken for the potential which that system has to deliver those benefits for Welsh people.
Cwestiwn 3, Llyr Griffith.
Diolch yn fawr, Llywydd.
Thank you, Llywydd. What additional support will the Welsh Government provide to enable communities to access better broadband services?
Well, diolch yn fawr, Llywydd.
Well, thank you to Llyr Griffith for that question. Responsibility for broadband services is not devolved to Wales. However, this government continues to invest in better access through our local broadband fund, our Access Broadband Cymru scheme and our fibre rollout.
Well, thank you for that response. I would be very pleased if you could confirm that those funds are all open and live at the moment, because I've been contacted by some communities, including Llanrhaeadr and Hymyrch and another community in Denbighshire, who have agreed to work with the company to bring fibre broadband to the area and taking advantage of the funding that is available from the UK government, and the intention then of benefiting from the additional funds that come from the Welsh Government. Before the election, it was said that that funding would come to an end because of the electoral period. Since then, they're still awaiting assurance that those funds are open again, and that, of course, as you can imagine, is the cause of some frustration, because there are over 1,000 homes in the area I'm talking about. The majority of them have poor access to broadband, and we know about other areas in Wales, mostly in rural areas, that are facing the same situation. So can you confirm when these communities will have confirmation that funds are available to tackle a problem that continues to be a problem more than any one of us would have wished?
Well, Llywydd, I'd like to thank Llyr Griffith for that supplementary question. The problem is that the UK government has changed the programme that they have in place, and they've just launched a new scheme to help people in the position that Llyr Griffith made reference to. We have agreed with the UK government on that new plan, and we are still determined to provide additional funding over and above the UK programme for people here in Wales. And I think today the UK government has published a statement which provides more details about the new scheme and does confirm that the funding provided in the past from the government here in Wales, which is £3,000 for individuals and £7,000 for businesses, that will remain in place. Now, I'm not quite sure when the UK scheme will open for individuals, but what I've seen today is that that isn't too far away now.
Paul Davis.
First Minister, it was estimated that around 75,000 older people in Wales have noted that they feel lonely almost all of the time or often, and it's clear that we have to consider isolation as a priority for public health. So for older people, access to broadband is vital, and this has helped people to stay in touch with family and friends and to access online services that are useful for them, particularly during the pandemic. So what is the Welsh Government doing to help to increase digital inclusivity nationwide, and how will the government ensure that older people in all parts of Wales have access to suitable broadband services to safeguard their mental health and their well-being?
Llywydd, Paul Davis.
Llywydd, I'd also like to thank Paul Davis for that supplementary. I saw the research that he referred to on the impact of the pandemic on those living alone and on older people in particular. So we are driving forward with in the investments that we have provided as a government. As I said in my original response, it isn't our responsibility to provide broadband services here in Wales. It's not devolved, but we have invested millions of pounds in order to provide access to those services in all parts of Wales. And the pandemic has shed light on the importance of this, and we will continue with all programmes that we have in place and will provide additional funding for that. So in addition to the funding that we'll provide to help people who will pursue the new UK government scheme, we are proceeding with a local fund which provides £10 million to local authorities and businesses to help them. There will be more funding for the Superfast Cymru successor programme, and it's the government's intention to build on everything that we have done in the past and to do it in a way that assists people in all parts of Wales and focuses on people who've not had access to broadband and who live alone.
Jane Dodds.
Thank
Thank you very much, Llywydd, and may I send my best wishes to the First Minister and his family.
More than 50% of respondents from rural areas in Wales felt that the internet was not fast and reliable, particularly people in Pembrokeshire, Ceredigion and Carmarthenshire. Only 36% of people in rural areas had superfast broadband, compared to 67% in urban areas. I wonder if the First Minister could just comment on the rollout of superfast broadband, just helping us all as well to just be clear about the responsibility of the rollout of the superfast broadband. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Well, diolch I Jane Dodds.
Well, I'd like to thank Jane Dodds and thanks for her opening remarks.
Responsibility, it is completely clear this is not a devolved matter. It is a responsibility of the UK government, and in the fashion that you would expect, given their ideological predilections, they thought that they could rely on the market to provide a service of this sort. And clearly, the market has failed, and the market will always fail in those places to which Jane Dodds has referred. The market will take care of densely populated areas where there's money to be made, and will never provide a service in remote and rural Wales where the cost of delivering fast broadband to a particular property will always exceed the money that is to be recouped from the people who live there. That is why the Welsh Government stepped in. That is why we were part of Superfast Cymru in the previous Senedd term. Over £200 million invested, 733,000 premises provided with fast, reliable broadband. Now, access to full fibre broadband at 21% of premises in Wales is higher than in England or in Scotland. But it was, I think, disappointing that the UK government's plans, which were to provide gigabit broadband to all premises in the UK by 2025, has since been scaled back. So instead of it being 100% commitment as first announced, it's now been reduced to 85%. And the problem is, as Jane Dodds was suggesting, I think, is that those extra 15% will continue to be those people in those rural and remoter parts of Wales where the costs involved are very significant. So we will go on with our successor programme to Superfast Cymru and with the other programmes that I have outlined in my earlier answers, Llywydd, to supplement what is available from the UK government, spending Welsh money where UK money ought to be more generously invested in order to go on trying to find ways of providing the sort of high-speed, reliable broadband connections that we've all learned to be so important over the last 15 months, and which are particularly significant in those rural communities.
Cwestiwn 4, Ken Skates.
What is the First Minister's current assessment of the spread of the Delta variant in Clwyd South?
Thank the member for that question. So the Delta variant is now widespread, both in Clwyd South and elsewhere in Wales. Our vaccination programme continues to offer the best means of combating the spread.
Well, thank you, First Minister. And being fully vaccinated against COVID is clearly a citizen's best defence against this terrible virus and the many variants of it. Could you just outline how, in addition to being amongst the world's very best performing nations in terms of the first dose, Wales is so successfully accelerating the rollout of the second dose of the vaccination?
Well, thank Ken Skates for that. He makes an important point, of course, that one dose is not a sufficient protection against coronavirus, particularly the new Delta variant. We're in a very good position in Wales, Llywydd, because we completed our offer of the first dose of vaccine to all adults in Wales, well ahead of our original plans and well ahead of other parts of the United Kingdom. This means that we've been able to switch the focus of our programme even more now to accelerating the take-up of second doses of the vaccine, and the figures are very encouraging here in Wales. We have over 9 out of 10 people already having a second dose of the vaccine amongst care home residents, people aged over 80, people aged over 70, healthcare workers, and as from tomorrow, I believe, we will go above 90% for everybody in their 60s as well. Today's figures show that 87% of people aged 55 to 59 already have both doses of the vaccine in Wales. And what we are doing with the 500,000 doses of the vaccine that we will provide over the 4 weeks before we next review the coronavirus restrictions is to reduce the length of time between first and second doses of the vaccine to no longer than 8 weeks for everybody aged over 40. That means that by the time we come to review our regulations, then people over 40 in Wales will be very well placed indeed to have the full protection that vaccination provides. And I'll echo what Ken Skates said, Llywydd, about the importance of that and our central motto here in Wales, that it's never too late to come forward for vaccination in Wales. Whether that is a first dose or whether you've missed out on a second dose, all you have to do is to contact your local health board and arrangements will be made for you to catch up on what you have missed out on. And that's very important for the individual, but it's very important because the more people we have vaccinated in a double dose, the greater protection we all have from the virus and for any future variants that it may throw our way.
Sam Rowlands.
Diolch, Llywydd, and thank you, First Minister, for your response to Mr Skates there. May I join you and the member for Clwyd South in the encouragement for everybody to get hold of this vaccine as quickly as possible, because, as you say, it makes such a difference to everybody. I recently had the privilege of visiting a community pharmacy in my region, in which there was a COVID clinic and they were administering the COVID vaccine to those who were able to access the community pharmacy. And it struck me while I was there that actually community pharmacies have such an important role to play, and perhaps a bigger role to play in the future, in the administration of the COVID-19 vaccine. So in your desire, and all of our desires, to see the acceleration of the vaccine, both in Clwyd South and across Wales as a whole, will you commit to working with community pharmacies to see how they can play a bigger part in supporting the acceleration of the vaccine in Wales?
Well, I certainly agree with the member about the part that community pharmacies have played in the whole vaccination effort. It's been a strength of the way we've done things in Wales, that we've had, a multi-dimensional way of delivering the vaccine through primary care, through community pharmacies, through mass vaccination centres to mobile vaccination centres. What we've tried to do is two things, I think. One is to calibrate the delivery mechanism to the geography of a particular part of Wales. And then secondly, to calibrate the delivery to the different age groups that we are targeting and to provide opportunities for vaccination in a way that meets the life circumstances of different age groups. And in that, community pharmacy has played a very important part and will, I know, be part of the mixed repertoire of vaccine provision for the future as we look to go on making sure that we provide offers of vaccination in a way that are the most convenient, the most easily accessible and the most readily available to people in order, again, I thank the member for what he said and echo what he said, in order that we get the maximum number of people possible vaccinated in Wales.
Cwestiwn 5, Siân Gwenllian.
Diolch, Llywydd.
Thank you, Llywydd. Will the First Minister make a statement on safety on trains during the pandemic?
Wel, diolch yn fawr I Siân Gwen.
Thank you very much to Siân Gwenllian. Llywydd, the COVID pandemic has posed major challenges for all train operators. Safety for staff and passengers is a key concern. Balancing demand, capacity and safety is a daily challenge as society emerges from previous levels of restrictions.
Constituents in Arfon understand why cafes and restaurants are concerned that their customers maintain social distancing and adhere to test and trace protocols, and that of course is a requirement under the law to prevent the spread of COVID. But my constituents don't understand why similar guidance aren't provided for Transport for Wales trains, where there is no social distancing on carriages and no track and trace in force. So there is a genuine risk that the virus is being spread across the nation. Could you give an explanation about this difference, please?
Well, I trial, of course.
Well, I could attempt to do so, of course, because the context is different. And those issues that Siân Gwenllian has raised and those experiences that people have had, of course, I'm aware of that, and I have seen what's been happening, but these are difficult, practical challenges. Passengers on trains do enter and leave trains in every station, which is utterly different to the situation in a cafe, of course, and what the people running the system are endeavouring to do is to assess a number of different factors that could lead to risks within the system. It would be possible to run more trains and in so doing reduce overcrowding, but that would mean that we would have to cut down on the current hygiene regime, which in itself reduces the risk of infection, particularly for the staff working on those trains. So there are no simple solutions to these problems. What I am convinced of is that everyone working in this area is working every day to try and run the system in a way which keeps people safe, those working on the railways and those train passengers too, and they're doing it in a scenario which is very challenging indeed when we are trying to reopen society, we are trying to find more possibilities for people, and when they do travel in increasing numbers, then that's going to be challenging for the people running the systems that we have in place.
Presiding Officer. First Minister, I want to just agree with you on exactly what you said, that I commend all of the transport operators that have been working under such difficult circumstances. But I also welcome the announcement that Transport for Wales is to receive £70 million to help in meeting operating costs during the pandemic. It comes on top of the £153 million of emergency funding provided to TFW last year. Could you advise me, First Minister, how much of this funding was and is required for safety measures on trains, such as social distancing, new notices, extra cleaning cleaning and sanitisation? And also, First Minister, when do you expect to know how much additional funding TFW will require to meet operating costs as restrictions ease in 2021 to 2022? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that important supplementary question, and indeed for pointing to the millions of pounds that have had to be invested, not simply to keep the train system safe, but to keep the train system running at all. If during the last 15 months the train system had to rely simply on the fare box, as it's called, the amount of money that it raises from the travelling public, then there wouldn't have been a train running anywhere in Wales. And yet we know how vital public transport is to so many of our fellow citizens. So that, I think it's £177 million that was made available last year to keep the railways working. And the member is right, that there is another £70 million set out in the first supplementary budget that we will provide to go on supporting the system through until the autumn. And it is exactly as the member said, of course it supports all those safety measures that are taken every day, but it also supports the simple revenue base of the system, while passenger numbers are still suppressed because of the public health emergency. I think the member is right as well, Llywydd, that beyond the autumn, we are likely to have to provide further assistance to our public transport system, trains and buses, to allow them to expand the number of passengers they are able to carry safely, and to go on operating under the continued restrictions that coronavirus will bring. We'll work on that together with the industry, and we'll bring forward further proposals later during the year. In the meantime, the system does have the confidence that comes with knowing that additional funding has been identified that will help them to continue to operate from now right through until the autumn.
Buffy Williams.
Diolch, Llywydd. First Minister, I recently met with Transport for Wales to discuss the Drakeford line service. I know how difficult it's been for commuters and Transport for Wales staff with reduced services and the need to keep a social distance. I left the meeting feeling optimistic. There are plans to increase the number of carriages and services from September. So last weekend, I was really disappointed to receive complaints from Rhondda residents who were stranded in Cardiff due to services being cancelled, with no alternative transport provided back home. Will the First Minister meet with me and Transport for Wales to address the problems on the Drakeford line and to discuss future plans for the Pentre Barracks site recently acquired by Transport for Wales?
Well, so I thank the member for what she said about the meeting she had and the plans that Transport for Wales does indeed have for additional services. The additional services, including services to Drakeford, are planned to begin at the end of August so that they are in place prior to the restart of the school term in September. Look, I completely understand the frustration of people who were caught up in what was a signal failure around Cardiff Central Station late last Saturday night. But it was just one of those technical things. A signal failed, trains weren't able to run, and while Transport for Wales made efforts to find, at absolutely short notice, replacement bus services, only 2 of the 16 buses they had originally ordered were able to turn up at the time when people needed to travel further afield. And by the time further buses arrived, many people had made their own way home. And I know that TFW has apologised to people who were affected as a result of what was an unforeseeable technical issue. I'm very glad that the members mentioned the purchasing by Transport for Wales of the Pentre Barracks site. That will enable the closure of the level crossing there, which has been assessed to be one of the highest risk crossings on the Wales route. And the Pentre Barracks site will also now be able to be used as a construction compound for the continuation of the Metro transformation programme. And I'll certainly ask the Minister responsible for Transport for Wales to meet with the member to explore further some of those developments and the issues that she's identified in her question this afternoon.
Cnola, cwestiwn 6, Peredur Owen Griffiths.
Diolch, Llywydd.
Thank you, Llywydd.
Welsh Government providing to businesses affected by social distancing during the pandemic?
Well, I thank the member for that. So throughout the pandemic, we have provided £5.7 million of funding to support town centre businesses directly in carrying out adaptations to meet social distancing requirements.
Diolch, First Minister. Many businesses have reopened following the last lockdown. They have done so with a reduced capacity. This invariably means a reduced income. I've had representations from a yoga studio in South Wales East that has reopened in the last couple of months, but can only welcome a third of their usual clients through the door. Their overheads remain the same. They received a bounce-back loan last year, and they received government support in March of this year. As a result of all this, they are on the brink of closure, with only £100 in their business account at the end of last week. Places that encourage an active and healthy lifestyle are vital for well-being and good physical and mental health. How will the government support businesses like the yoga studio in my region to survive the economic challenges posed by social distancing?
Well, Llywydd, can I absolutely recognise the challenges that are caused to businesses unable to operate in the way that they would have done if it were not for the need to protect their users from the risks that coronavirus provides to staff and to users alike. I'm glad that the business was able to benefit from some Welsh Government support. Members will have seen that the Economy Minister has announced a further sum of money specifically to help those businesses who continue either not to be able to operate at all or operate in the circumstances that Mr Griffiths has just outlined. And there will be more help from the Welsh Government while this emergency persists and while businesses are trying to get back to being able to trade in the way that they once were able. In the meantime, to go back to the member's original question, all that additional investment that the Welsh Government has provided does mean that through those physical adaptations, the outdoor seating, the awnings, the street front adaptations, the outdoor serveries, the electrical connections, all those many things that we have been able to assist businesses with Wales, including in the member's own region, does mean that businesses have been able to adapt to those new circumstances and at least trade to the maximum extent that is commensurate with the ongoing dangers that coronavirus provides.
Diolch i'r Prif Weinidog.
I thank the First Minister. The next item is the business statement and announcement, and I call on the Trefnydd to make that statement. Lesley Griffiths.
There are no changes to this week's business. Draft business for the next 3 weeks is set out on the business statement and announcement, which can be found amongst the meeting papers available to members electronically.
Laura Jones.
Diolch, Llywydd. Business Minister, it is all very well the Education Minister announcing a seismic change in the education's